Good morning from Bali. I'm Kat Kabira, and this morning it's super early, and I just finished a meditation practice and was writing, and was reminded of what we call in biodynamic craniosacral therapy, like how do you drop into the deepest current. And I have no expectation that you know anything about craniosacral therapy, and this isn't a video on it, but just to consider when you're meeting your own system, what are you perceiving? So let's just talk about the ocean. I think it's the best metaphor. There's a reason why it's often used. So we've got the wave where like the strongest current will be on the surface. So for those of you who swim or surf in the ocean, the part of the safety is how do you dive underneath? And so especially if like a big wave's coming, so that you don't get like trashed around and thrown, it's like you can actually dive under where it's actually much more calm. And it's helpful to know that in our own system as well. How can you start to dive underneath? So one thing that can be perceived in someone's system, and also just quick side note, I don't only practice craniosacral therapy in my energy work. I do as we would call an Indonesian campur, or a mixture of things. It's my own thing. But I really do respect that system. So one thing that you can perceive in someone else's system as well as yours is that, there's almost like layers of currents. And it's like, okay, this is what's up right now. This is what's affecting the system. And then underneath, you're also looking for, like, where's that potency, that life force? Is there resource and reserves? And so you could have it where it's like there might be some anxiety or anger or a lot of like friction, but then what's underneath? And in our self-perception, a really helpful question can be, in those moments when we're anxious or freaked out or reactive or anything that's not calm or happy, basically. Before we quickly go into the spiral of the story, a great question is, can I just start to drop into my body and breathe? Which sometimes can happen immediately, and sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it's like there's a level of stress and we can't actually calm down. There's too much stimulation. That's where it actually can be helpful to have a friend or a therapist, someone to act as a witness to help bring you down. And in general, like a lot of times when I'm working with people, it's more like their system knows how to heal itself once they start to calm down. Like that's when we start to remember ourselves. There's a word in Lakesh, the wave remembers itself. And we're here to remember ourselves. So one helpful question that you can ask yourself, not just on a mental level at all, but on an embodied, energetic level, is, what's underneath what's happening right now, especially with triggers. I think we can all recognize that when there are triggers, it's like, okay, why? And when I say why, again, it's not like the mental, the why. We don't want to spiral. But the embodied inquiry of, it's so fascinating that this is like getting me so much. What's underneath? What's there? What's here for me? What can I feel? And, it's such a gem. Like when I used to teach live biodynamic yin classes, biodynamic meaning, again, it's my own creation, holding the field and giving a group of students on a collective and individual level, how do you start to sense your subtle energetic system? What's ready to be met? How to feel our flow, reclaim our flow. Part of the dropping in of people, as getting everyone to settle, is reminding, hey, we have a choice as to what level of the ocean we live on. Is it the more superficial side, or can we start to drop down to, I almost call it like the primordial ocean. Like, it's such a slow current. And what prevents us from being able to drop in there is being busy and being distracted. And I definitely notice, even in my own life, despite all this knowing that I have, is, wow, just running errands or being busy with work and the to-do list. Even in my practices, it's like, okay, how do we start to cultivate that sense of slowness? And it takes patience. If we consider lovemaking, there's a lot of ways to have sex and fuck and make love and spark that divine current. And the where the magic is in really slowing down. But that takes patience. We really have to watch all these parts of ourselves that get bored or want something else or have expectations. It's actually the same thing when you do energy work, when you're really dropping into the field in a feminine way. How do we really start to listen? It can be terrifying because it brings us into new territory. It's stripping away. It's vulnerable. And yet, when we really drop into that slowness, that's where it's like, oh my God, there's this whole other world that we get to access. And, part of what I teach for those of you who train with me in energy work with yourself or others is, how do we start to access that slower brainwave state, what we call theta, but to be awake when we're doing that. So there's a common term that I used to call the cranial snore, where you might be the one on the table receiving, and suddenly you're like, I'm awake, but and you might have noticed this in Shavasana. I'm awake, but oh my God, I just snored. And you almost want to tell everyone no, I am awake. I know I snored right there. And it can also happen though, and I have to really remind my students, welcome to this cute little cat. Her name's Papouk. She's French, Persian. So I'll just let you see her for a second. There she is. All right. That wasn't so great. Anyway, so in the cranial snore, what can also happen is, I was obviously being too serious, so she was like, come on, cat. In the cranial snore, what can happen is when you're initiating in healing work, it's like, how do we stay awake when these currents are so slow? And it's something, if you meditate or if you do shamanic work, and it's something that my kids, when I work with kids, they really get it. I don't know if you if you remember when you were a child, how it was so easy. It was so easy for you to kind of surf in between dream state and waking state. So there's a natural way that we know how to surf as humans that we kind of lose as we get older. We're almost like, society has taught us to stay in these brainwave states. So in a way, we're reawakening what's already been accessible to us. We just didn't know. We forgot. Remember, the wave remembers. So, the training, students will undergo is how do we stay conscious in these really slow brainwave states? And it's not uncommon. I've had people giving me sessions and suddenly their head just falls down on me, and they just fell asleep. And also it brings up, if we're tired, once the field hits, it's you're just going to fall asleep. if you tend to use, caffeine, and I do drink coffee, just FYI, but if you tend to rely on caffeine as your only source of energy, that it's going to knock you out. So, there is a beautiful initiation, and especially when we're talking about what we can perceive in someone's energy system or our own, that's beyond the physical. Like it's easy to perceive the physical fluids and still be in a certain brainwave state, but I'm talking about how to, when you're doing a deeper level of perception in someone's field, you really have to slow down. And that's where practices like Yoga Nidra can be really helpful. And also my version of Yoga Nidra, which is the Vision Quest. So the invitation for you is, and I know I went on a lot of tangents as I usually do, the invitation for you is how can you start to sense or meet what's underneath? And, one helpful thing if you're totally new to perceiving your system is, what is it like to perceive your system like a body of water? Almost like that there's a flow that goes from before your feet, through your legs, and beyond your head, and then back down. And it's almost like you can sense like, oh, there's a flow, and then there's places where the flow gets congested or stopped. And you can actually work two different ways. One would just be like, oh, I'm just going to rest my attention where the flow is stagnant and just kind of see what happens, what's needed. And the key word here is like resting attention, watching, feeling. So it's an active passive way of, it's an active observation. So you're not like, oh, I'm going to go in there and just like undo it. Oh, I know what's best. You're also clicking into the greater source, the field, the divine, that has this greater intelligence. The other thing is, and this can be really helpful because we tend to be what I call a car crash nation. And when I say nation, I mean globally. Like, let's look at where the problem is, as opposed to where are things working really well. How many times are you perceiving yourself and looking at, like, this is what's great about me. Usually when I ask my students, tell me what you think you need to work on, and they'll give me like this laundry list where I almost have to just like stop them after a while. And then I'll flip it and I'll say, okay, so, tell me what your strengths are. Tell me what you do really well. And, like there will be like long silence, awkwardness. Am I allowed to say it? I don't let myself look at that. It's hard for me to see that. Maybe it's like they're pulling out three possibilities, but there's a lot more effort in there. So it can be helpful training for self-awareness of, can I look at what's already flowing? What's doing well? Because a lot of times we can dismiss our strengths and actually dismiss that which we think is kind of strange. That might be our superpower. So what is it like to sense the pleasure or the flow in your system? And just rest your attention there. You might notice that suddenly by focusing on that, other things start to flow as well. So you can do that both with just perceiving your own system, but also in your own life. What's already going well, right? And the final part is, can we drop into what's underneath? And that can be, again, on a subtle energetic level, like you're laying down and it's like, okay, I'm feeling all these things. What is it like to allow myself to slow down and rest into a deeper current? Like you're just resting at like the deepest current of the ocean floor. And it's super slow. And it's super relaxing. It's a place where we almost like we ground and resource. Personally, I love it, if I do that with my my own meditation or just resting in that. And then I come out of that and first of all, noticing how I want to use my energy from there. It's a lot easier where I feel like I'm just being with myself. There's more presence. It's not like what's next? Like whether we like it or not, there's a constant what's next and also what just happened and, sliding backwards and forwards that's splitting us from here. And, I'm lucky enough right now where I've got a piano at my house and just for personal pleasure, I love to just make up songs. I just sit down and I'm like, this is the song of myself right now. And I love to just sit down after playing, because it's like, if it's a more erratic moment, like if I'm just passing by the piano, I'm having a lot of feelings, there's going to be certain songs that I play. But when I've come out of that like primordial wave, that deeper, like the lowest current, and then I come into the piano, it's like there's every note matters, and the space matters. And one thing that I always respect in what I am moving towards is, Miles Davis. I read somewhere, I love Miles Davis, and he comes from St. Louis, Missouri, and so do I, partially. So one of his ways that he would interview other musicians is to see how not how complicated someone could play, but how slowly, how comfortable are you in holding silence and playing slowly. It goes back to making love, right? It goes back to energy work. There's a theme going on, right? And so it's like, when I'm playing, and if I can really feel the depth of the sound, it's like every note matters. And you can really feel it like just hit your system, like on a multidimensional level. And then that space matters. And it's almost like that perfection of like the perfect amount of space, like it's a note on its own or a series of notes. And then suddenly that next note comes in. And so both the space and the notes like have their own songs. As Miles says, don't play what's there, play what's not there. And as humans, do we have the guts to play what's not there? Think about the inundation of information that is coming globally. And can we see what's underneath? What's underneath? As a writer, it's the same thing. Like there's the space, and then there's the words. It's the stuff that we're not saying that's delivering the message. I even, students are realizing a lot of times, like, oh, wow, Kat, it's not just the energy healing. It's the sitting together. It's the talking. There's the words, and then there's the underneath. Painters, space, light, color, what's there, what's not there. Like we're constantly telling stories of what we name and don't name. And most of us, like we're all way more powerful than we give ourselves credit for, and we're way more sensitive and perceptive. And in some ways, unconsciously, like without meaning to, we've been forced to, or have just given up our awareness and power. Sure, I will agree to the superficial reality, and it takes a lot of guts to be like, I'm gonna dive underneath. I'm not going to let this thing just trash me around and keep me in fear. I'm not going to stay on the surface. I'm going to go underneath. I'm going to go rest in that silence. And you can do this with your own mind. And because what we're moving towards is how much, who's creating? What's being created? How does reality look different when we're sitting quietly versus busy and our I'm going to use the yogic word, like the vrittis, Sanskrit vrittis, the waves, when they're really frantic, versus, oh wow, life looks different when I'm calm, right? Think about, a classic thing, you come out of a yoga class, most of the time, and you're like, wow, I came in thinking I had all these problems. I've come out and everything's okay. I didn't actually do anything to fix any of that. I just calmed myself down. And we can do that being with friends. I have one beautiful friend in Australia where just sitting down and having coffee with him, there's a way that his presence and his awareness, it just like, it brings calm to the system. And in a way that's what we want to look at is what keeps us real, not what activates and freaks us out. How do we stay in that calm? And that's not to say that we can't do things that stimulate our system, but a long time ago, I remember an Olympic swimming coach showed me. He was like, my fastest swimmers, the reason why they're so good is that they're calm. And I was like, wow. Think about surfing, right? Like, you're not going to surf well if you see a wave and freak out, right? If you're in fear, if you're freaking out, if you're not going to, you got to stay calm. You got to be focused. So that's kind of our own personal, how do we surf our own waves? And it takes guts also, because there can be a collective group energy, which is like, let's all agree upon agreeing to certain things so that we can stay in this resonance together. So we can judge ourselves if we feel different. There can be fear, like, oh my God, I'm not with the tribe. I want to belong. Those are primal feelings. What if I get rejected? What if I get ostracized? Can I survive? And yet, groupthink isn't always the most empowered thinking. And, and with that said, sometimes we all know we can drive ourselves crazy when we're alone. And sometimes we need community and groupthink to bring out our hearts. So I'm not discrediting it, but it's like, how can we know our own minds and how it influences not just what we're perceiving, like not just what we're seeing, but our energy field and that which is getting reflected in our field. Think about when you fall in love. It's the best feeling, and it's a drug, and it's lasts for a few weeks, months if we're lucky. I mean, I don't know, that's my version of it. But it's kind of like, suddenly everything's okay. It's like you go to the post office. Oh, there's a 45-minute line. Whatever, I'm in love. Like there's just this joy that gets emitted. Suddenly I got to go call the bank, and it's another 45 minutes. I'm like cracking jokes and just beaming out this love. And that love perception actually is something that we get to have without needing another person to ignite it. And how do we start to connect to that love current that, in a way, it's so that we don't try to possess other people or events or control. It's like, where is this love that's always available, this current, this thing that birthed us and this thing that will carry us out, when we leave our bodies? How do we start to contact that? And so if we can also, as we sit with ourselves and really recognizing our own minds, and I know it's such a tagline, right? Like, we're not our thoughts. And I'm to be very clear, I never am asking you to bypass anything. So there is a time and place to be like, this is what happened. This is my story. This is my pain. And not just on a mental level. I can feel it, okay? We don't bypass, okay? But when you sit with yourself enough, you can be like, wow. There's this vibration that I hook into in my field that's coloring my reality a certain way. How do I get to go underneath that? What if that's not real? What's real? How do I go underneath? And that's where the magic of stillness happens. And I'm going to be so honest. It's not like you can, at least for me, it's not like every day like, oh, I'm going to be in stillness. Sometimes it's like, there's a lot of stuff happening on the surface. I've got to meet that, and you've got to use your tools. And maybe you need someone else to help you, right? Like anytime we have major stuff happen, breakups, death, trauma, it's like, it can be challenging to be like, oh, let me go into the stillness and what's underneath. No, let's meet this right now, and how do we be held and how do we be cared for and, and how do we ride this? But there are times and over time in your practice, how do we start to cultivate that stillness or drop into that stillness that's there? Because that really helps us take ownership of how we're creating our life. And I when I say creating, I'm not like The Secret, but also that where is that responsibility? Where is our power? And what happens if you can drop underneath? What do you start to sense? And it also can help. I mean, I was a wild child, and there's still My wildness is still here, but I'm using it for different things. Because there can be a fear, when we first start getting on the path. And I'm talking to those of you in your 20s, like, oh, fuck, am I going to become boring? And it's more like that you'll start to notice, that energy that I would kind of dissipate externally all the time to feed something. And there's a time and place, and you kind of got to do it until it doesn't feel right anymore. You can't just stop it, right? All of a sudden, finally, like the ways I used to party, it just was like, this doesn't get me off the same way. There's something else that gets me off. But you start to cultivate, like, where you're plugging your energy into. What is this creating? Is it spiraling? Is it making a chaos? Is it draining? You can even do this with people and relationships. What's starting to cultivate something deeper underneath? And for me, it's never been a barometer of spiritual practice. I think, and it's going to be, we're all going to have different anchor points or something that drives us. For some of you, it might be your children. It could be like a dream that you're really moving towards. For me, it's always been health, because I was kind of born with a pretty compromised immune system and very sensitive, and health, okay? Like, almost like I need a dramatic, I must have written in the script somewhere, I need something that's kind of life or death feeling, to keep me on my toes. Otherwise, I'll fuck around too much. But the other one for me was writing. When I'm really writing, not just like journal scribbles, and not work writing, not web writing, not even manuals, but like the deep writing from my soul. I suddenly had to look at my energy management. What allows me to show up the way I want to show up? So my question for you is, with your own personal energy management, how can you make choices that help you stay connected to you, to your truth? This idea of undercurrent, can you start to sense it in your own system? So like physical, like, there's an undercurrent in my energy system. There's an undercurrent in your mental field. I've got all these judgments that I do on myself and on others. What's underneath? Can I drop underneath? What if that stuff is just distraction? What's underneath? Emotionals. Okay, I've got all this going on. I'm not bypassing. What's underneath? And although I'm saying what's underneath, in shamanic terms, they say that you can look at the world like from the perspective of the snake. So it's like, literal world, like we're looking up, there's the grass, there's some dirt, and then suddenly, let's go from eagle. And it's like, from eagle perspective, it's like, from way up, it's like you're looking at the same thing, but you get the aerial view, you get the overview. And how can we start to realize that there is a power in shifting from snake world to eagle world? And I just want to add in the hummingbird, which is like the heart. How can I look in from the level of joy? So I know I dropped a lot of nuggets. It's Sunday, so it's like a Sunday morning session. Sending love from myself and also Papook, the magic French cat, who likes to hang out with me as well. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye.